As India moves towards achieving FLN, foundational literacy and numeracy for all its children by 26-27, it is important to pause and reflect on how learning outcomes can be measured effectively. This is where school-based assessments play a pivotal role. The National Education Policy, NEP 2020, highlights the importance of student assessments that focus on meaningful learning and development. It promotes conducting assessments that go beyond rote memorization and encourage critical thinking and practical application of knowledge. Hello, and a very warm welcome to another exciting edition of Edge Talks, where we interact with experts from the education sector to gain sharp and practical insights on a range of issues around education. Our guest today is someone who continues to be deeply committed to enriching the reliability and robustness of learning assessments worldwide. With a career spanning nearly 3 decades, Dr. Michael J. Young is an accomplished psychometrician and assessment expert focused on improving educational outcomes through high-quality, evidence-based assessment practices. His international expertise includes pivotal roles in assessment programs across several countries, including the United States, contributing significantly to enhancement of educational measurement practices. Most notably, his work includes key projects such as Australia's NAPLAN assessments, Abu Dhabi's external measure of student achievement, and India's problem-solving assessments, just to name a few. Dr. Michael, firstly, a very warm welcome to India. It is a pleasure to have you with us today for this episode of Edge Talks. And let me start by asking what might seem like a very basic question on assessments. What, in your opinion, are 2 or 3 main basic purposes of designing large-scale assessments for student learning?
Well, the main objective when you're having a large-scale assessment is the focus on what's happening at the system level. If you take a look at assessments, international assessments such as PISA or TIMSS, the focus there is looking at the national level. How is this country and the students in this country, how are they doing with respect to a set of questions versus, say, another country? Some large-scale assessments can combine the system-wide, but also look at what happens at the student level. So, for example, if you look at Australia's NAPLAN program, they're very much interested in what's happening with Australia as a whole, what's happening with each state and territory, but they're also interested in what's happening at the school level, and NAPLAN also does produce individual student scores. Now, that's something that TIMSS and PISA, or in the United States, NAEP, do not do. So the main focus is systemic, but you can get the individual sometimes as almost like a bonus.
Michael, given your extensive experience of working on large-scale assessments internationally, what would you say are some of the key success factors, both from an administrative perspective, as well as capturing data on student learnings?
Well, I think of 4 things that come to mind. Interestingly enough, none of them are super technical things that you would associate with statistics or psychometrics, per se. But the first is having a clearly defined purpose in mind for the purpose and use for the assessment. The second point is, once you have that purpose and use, you need to gather evidence to validate that test for those intended purposes and uses. Now, that could include looking at evidence related to the content of the test. It can include evidence related to the reliability of the test scores and so forth. I think the third thing that then follows after that would be communicating the results. You have to be able to communicate the results in a way that makes sense to a whole wide variety of stakeholder groups. And then finally, you have to be aware of what the unintended and intended consequences are of the use of the test and the interpretation of the test scores. So those, I think, are 4 really key things that you have to look at.
Recently, you've also got involved with India's attempt to design large-scale school-based assessment. Based on India's National Education Policy NEP 2020 recommendations, CBSE has embarked on an ambitious, large-scale school-based assessment called SAFAL, Structured Assessment for Analyzing Learning. Based on your extensive experience and expertise, what would be your key recommendations for a successful design and implementation of CBSE SAFAL?
Well, the first thing is for CBSE to keep doing what they're currently doing, because they've done a very, very good job of laying the foundation for the SAFAL assessment. I think I had spoken earlier about how important it is to delineate carefully what the purposes and uses are of the assessment. And CBSE has done a very good job of aligning the SAFAL test to the national educational goals that you have. So, for example, you have a test. One of the stages that's delineated in the national educational goals would be for grades 3 to 5. Another stage is from grades 6 to 8. In each case, CBSE has made certain that you have a 5th grade test, you have an 8th grade test, so that you can track and monitor progress across the whole span of that stage. Now, later on, they're also going to be introducing a test for grade 3, and that will look at probably the foundational stage, which would be grades 2 and below. So it will really be the beginning of, let's say, grade 3 as sort of the capstone for what happens in the foundational grades. Once you've gone ahead and you have a great foundation like this, and you have your purposes and so forth set out, the next stage will be creating the score reports and developing all those reports and communicating. That's going to be really, really key.
Michael, what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities that you have observed in implementation of large-scale psychometric tests that you would give as advice as India and CBSE implement SAFAL?
Well, for me, the thing that's most interesting and most challenging, I think, for SAFAL is that it represents a departure in what I would call assessment culture from what currently goes on in India. We're all used to looking at things like the board examinations. We're looking at tests that are for selection, for placement. It wasn't until I came to India that I heard for the very first time the term topper. You're always looking to find out who's the best and making all those kinds of comparisons. Well, SAFAL is a very different test. I mean, the focus there is on looking at students' strengths and weaknesses. You want to be able to report back for individual students, but more importantly, you want to look at all the sections, let's say, doing grade 5 mathematics in a school. You want to gather together that information. You want the teachers to take a look and see how the students did on various competencies and adjust their instruction accordingly. Well, that's a really different way of using a test than what's gone on beforehand. And I think the negotiation of that transition from one kind of assessment culture to another, that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest challenges. I don't have as many concerns necessarily with the purely technical pieces, such as developing a score report or something like that, or equating test forms. But that's the piece that I think is going to be most challenging.
What role does psychometric play in establishing the importance of getting reliable data points in ensuring better framing or delivery of reforms by the decision makers? And what are some examples you can share of these from your work in other countries?
Well, I'm of the opinion that anything, absolutely anything that affects the validity of a test and the use of the test score purposes and interpretations, that's something that I'm interested in as a psychometrician. You know, validity, anything that affects the validity is important to me. One area, for example, where you need to be careful is in the comparability of test scores from one test administration to another. Just about all these tests that we're looking at are designed to track how students are doing over time. You want to look at this year's 4th grade class and you want to compare it to last year's 4th grade class and so forth. If you don't have comparable tests and comparable test scores, you can have very bad things happen. So, for example, if the scores go up, was that because the test got easier, or was it the students got better? If you don't know for a fact if the test scores are comparable, then you can't disentangle those different things. So those are the kinds of things that you want to go ahead and be thinking about as a psychometrician when you're looking at the data and you're preparing things for different decision makers.
Michael, in your experience with assessment like Australia's National Assessment Program Literacy and Numeracy, NAPLAN, and similar ones, when do you typically start seeing their impact on learning outcomes of children? I mean, particularly from a key transition points of grades 3, 5, and 8.
Well, in my mind, I really don't think in terms of the test having the impact on the student learning. I mean, there's lots of other factors that you're going to want to consider. There can be as diverse as level of school funding, parental involvement, teacher education and training, professional development. All those things are going to have a lot greater impact than the assessment itself. Now, the assessment will focus on student learning and help you think about what are some of those other factors that you need to work on, but in and of itself, it doesn't really change the student learning. You can think of it more like a thermometer, okay? You want your thermometer to be reliable, you want it to be highly accurate, but thermometers don't go ahead and cause fevers to go away or improve your health in and of itself. It's just an important instrument. It's a tool for going ahead and monitoring that stuff. So I suppose in some cases, I'm just trying to make the best thermometers I possibly can, for uses in educational settings.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing these useful insights. It's been a pleasure having you with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Edge Talks. Do join us next time for yet another exciting episode as we meet with other experts from the education sector. Do tell us what you felt in the comments section below, and do not forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube page for more content.